Hello, I am Tara. This is my mother, Jill. We are the authors of the Dining on a Dime cookbook. You can get the link in the description below. Mom is also the author of Penny Pension Mama, 500 Ways I Lived on $500 a Month. And today we are doing the next installment. I have no idea where we're at with this. So
what number it is?
I don't know what number
I don't
we're
know
on.
what number we're on.
I think it's 30-something, but anyway. It'll be in the description, so go for it.
Go for it, huh? I can't quite remember where I think we ended off with me finishing up my cabin. I'd just gotten my cabin all put together. For those of you who haven't gone back yet, we moved to Idaho. I lived across the street from Tawra and Mike, and I had an empty shell of a log cabin that I had to spend 6 months.
Mm-hmm. And this is all in a playlist, so you guys can just watch the whole playlist if you want to go back and
find
watch.
out, the other ones. And so I just gotten everything moved back. I'd gone 6 months without really running water, no kitchen, things like that. And so I finally got that all put in the house, all my furniture moved in and everything. And so there wasn't too much happening right after I got that done. I was trying, the first year, although I say that, in the first year that we were in Idaho, Tawra and I had to make 5 trips back to Kansas and Colorado within that first year.
I lived across the street from Mom. So.
Yeah, and so we were constantly, something was coming up that we had to make a trip back to Kansas or Colorado. My dad was in the hospital, so we had to jump in the car and make a trip back there. And some of them were in the middle of winter. Why I say this was from Idaho to Kansas, it's a very rough trip when you drive it. We had to go through mountain ranges with snow, way up high above the car on each side. And those were hard trips. They were really, really hard.
Oh, you mean snow's above the car?
Yeah,
oh,
yeah. And so they were rough trips on us. And
then there's Wyoming.
Yeah.
And if you don't know anything about Wyoming,
we love Wyoming.
There's a reason why Wyoming is the least populated state. We love all our Wyoming friends, and our assistant Donna lives in Wyoming, but
it was always rough going across Wyoming. Yeah. And so this trip was a really hard trip on us, and with us having the chronic fatigue and to have to make it like 5 times within 12 months, it was a rough time for us. And I'm mentioning this because later on in the series, you'll understand why we ended up eventually moving back to Kansas because of having to make these hard trips and that type of thing. But anyway, the first year it was pretty pleasant in spite of making the trips. We loved the weather. Tara started a garden. She had a big, huge greenhouse. We were doing things like she had a bunch of chives, and so we were selling the chives to the restaurant there in town. Do you remember doing that? We had, and I'm telling you these little bits of ideas because people are always saying, well, how do I make money? What can I do at home to make money? And we just constantly were trying to think of things. We put a wooden table with a wooden box screwed onto it on this wooden table, and we'd set out flowers and vegetables that she was growing, and people would just drive by my house. It was out in my front yard. She'd drive by my house, and they'd put the money in the box and take whatever they want. And people were always honest. I mean, some places
we lived in a town of 450.
Some places that maybe wouldn't work, but it worked for us. So and we sold the chives at the local restaurant. And all we did, just so you'll be fearless, all we did was they didn't say they needed it or anything. We grabbed up a bunch of chives. And we walked over there and we said, do you guys need some fresh chives to use in your restaurant? They were all over us because they had to go into a town about,
70
miles away through mountains or have this stuff delivered. So they were so tickled to get this fresh vegetables and things from us. So just use your imagination. Try to think, where is there a need and where can I fill it? So at this time, BJ, Tara informed us she was expecting. And things floated along so wonderful. The weather was perfect in Idaho. I was so happy. And then she said, we're going to have BJ. I mean, I was excited about the first grandbaby. I never expected to be this excited about the second one. And I was flipping out. And we did pretty good until about, 4 months or so into the pregnancy.
We did pretty good 4 months into the pregnancy.
Yes, I'm going to say we because she had to go on bed rest. And then there was Michael was working at Washington at this point, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Michael wasn't there. He worked
100 miles from home, so he spent 3 nights and 4 days at work and then came home
for the
4
weekend.
nights and 3 days for the weekend.
Yeah. And so I had to take care of Tara. She could not do anything but get up to use the restroom or take a shower. Otherwise, she had to stay down. And I got to give her credit. She felt so bad about me having to do that because you got to realize we both were pretty sick at that time. We weren't on the top of our game by any means. We were so sick. But she would say, I hate to ask this, but can I have another cup of tea? she felt so bad. And so I had to take care of 2 households at this point. I had to do the laundry for 2 households and fix meals for us. I pretty much did most, all the, well, I had to do everything for both of us at this point. That's why I said we. But she was lounging at this time. And they came out with this thing called the internet, and they had chat rooms. Were they called chat rooms?
Forums.
Forums. They had forums where all these young gals were sitting and chit-chatting. And she was telling them about how I'd saved money, and paid off my mortgage. And then none of them knew how to cook or anything. So she'd pop up, Mom, how do you cook this? Or, Mom, how did you save money on hamburgers?
Now, Tara's version of this is... I didn't go to Mom for every question, just the ones I didn't know. So I was giving these people, what happened was I was on the November 97 at Parents' Place. Some of you are still watching us. Thank you, 20 years later, 21 years later, 22 years later. But we had a frugal living group in a November 97. And so people would always say, well, how do I save money on groceries? How do I save money on this? So I would give them the advice and all of that and that kind of stuff. So that's where we got started. And at the same time, while I was on bed rest, I was reading the Tightwad Gazette.
She was doing Tightwad Gazette.
And in there she said, everybody wants me to write a cookbook, but I don't want to do it and I don't like cooking. And I thought, well, I can do that. So that's when I started typing out recipes for Dining on a Dime.
Yeah, I was going to get to that.
Yeah.
And so I remember one of the first tips, they were asking about how you save on meat and hamburger at the time. And I remember, and this is one of the tips we still to this day recommend to people. I told them, don't use the whole pound of hamburger, in your casserole or your spaghetti sauce. Use a half a pound and then take 2 tablespoons out and put in a container. And after just a couple of weeks, you'll have another half a pound to use. It's like free hamburger. And I always remember that was one of the first tips.
Yeah, because people don't realize you don't have to use a full pound.
Yeah.
Even if it calls for a pound.
And they were so excited over
Yeah.
hearing that. And so that was one of the first tips I ever did. And then Tara after a while, she kept saying, everybody wants us to write a book, And I said, no way do I want to write a book, because I didn't know anything about writing a book. I wasn't an author or anything, but so that's how we started doing. She would or how do you clean this, or what do you use for that? And so I would run back over to the house. We started working a little bit on the book at the time because I had a lot of recipes. I had a lot of Capper's Weeklies, different magazines and things that I'd saved over the years. And if we needed a tip or idea, I'd run over and dig through, paw through everything till I found the tip of an ideas to do. And we eventually got the book started putting together. We had it pretty well, all the recipes in there. But then we kind of decided, I don't want a boring cookbook. Let's put some tips or jokes, funny stories. And so then we added the funny stories to it. And then we decided, you have to put pages for substitutions, equivalents. And then Tara said something about, well, we need to put things in for menus or leftovers. And so it just gradually kept building until we got the book all put together. Well, in the meantime then, I'm kind of running her back and forth. It was a busy time for us because we were doing all this. And Tara was, like I said, we'd go to the grocery store and she couldn't really walk around or do anything. So I'd run up to the grocery. It was hard getting groceries anyway because we'd go about every 2 weeks. And so we and you had to buy everything. If you had to go to the hardware store, if you had to go to the pharmacy, if you had to go to do anything, we had to do it all in that one day because it was so far to drive. And so it was a job to go into town, just even for my stuff. But then when we were doing it together, and I'd have to go get the wheelchair, I remember, and bring it back to the car and then wheel her up to the thing. And then she would have to push the basket in front of her, and I'd push her wheelchair, and we were maneuvering. It was an interesting time. Well, then
it was a fun 5 months.
Yeah, I thought, oh boy, it was kind of hectic. And I had no idea what it was going to evolve in eventually. We had no idea. But anyway, so then BJ Kellum was, we went to I kept taking her, and they would put her on a monitor for contractions. And so finally one day it was time, and Michael came flying there. And I'll never forget about BJ being born. I never wanted, it's not that I didn't want to, but I just think it's better if the husband and the wife are together in the delivery room together, to give them their privacy when the baby's being born.
Privacy, my bologna and cheese sandwich.
Well, I know, that's the way I felt. So I wasn't going to be in there, but she was having such a long labor. I was just staying in the room till it got closer to time. Well, I was kind of back in a corner area a little bit by the head of the bed and talking to her and this, that, and the other. All of a sudden she said, "It's coming." And I remember I just said, "Oh," and I think Michael said something, or the nurse went and ran or something. And before we knew it, it didn't take them 2 minutes. The doctor was there, and then every nurse in the hospital. So literally every nurse in the hospital.
BJ and Ellie were born in a 10-bed hospital in no man's land in Idaho, and 2 of those beds were maternity. And us and one other patient were the only patients at the hospital that night.
Yeah.
So every nurse decided this was
so exciting because they only had a baby born about once a month at that point in this hospital. So this was so exciting. So all these nurses, they were rolling this equipment, and I was barricaded in before I could even slip out. Of course, at that point, I guess it didn't really matter when you had most of the hospital staff in there. I think the janitor just about was in there watching you.
It was so mad.
That's what I always remember about BJ's birth. And of course, every one of my grandsons are the handsomest ones in the whole wide world. He was so cute with his little cheeks, and he was adorable. But
would you like to come make an appearance, BJ, right now?
Let them see how cute you are now, BJ. So he was born, and it wasn't too bad because after he was born, Tawra was able. Well, no, that's when you had your surgery. I forgot.
Yeah.
And so it was a little rough for a couple of months afterwards.
No, his real name is not BJ. He has another official name, but we call him BJ.
Yes, so. I call him BJ Kellum. And so Tawra had to have surgery.
I had my gallbladder out.
Yeah, not too long after that.
He was born in November, and then in February I had to have my gallbladder out.
Yeah. And she didn't have a very good, well, in December after he was born too, Grandma and Grandpa came back to visit us, and David and Shayla, my son, her brother, came back. And Shayla got really sick when they were driving home, and she's going to kill me for putting this on here, but my folks were following my son and his wife behind them, and it was dead of winter and through the mountains, and she kept getting so car sick, and she rolled down the window and throw up, and my folks said, yeah, they saw that barf coming out there just freezing in chunks. And I'm telling you this story because it's going to have an impact later on. But so then Tawra was having a really hard time with the surgery and trying to take care of BJ for till about March or so, first part of March. And that's when Michael's folks were going to come out, and I was taking you to the doctor that day to have her surgery rechecked again because she was still...
It wasn't healing. The incision wasn't healing.
Yeah, and we thought, oh no, company, because we were just exhausted with all the birth and everything. Another thing I remember about BJ was I had to stroller him all the time. I lost I don't know how many pounds because he wouldn't go to sleep unless I pushed him in the stroller. And he was so cute because I crocheted a blanket for him, and I'd throw it over the stroller trying to get him to not look at things. And I'd look down, there was these cute little eyeballs looking at me, and he was just grinning from ear to ear. I thought, well, that blanket's doing a lot of good to put him to sleep. But so I had to stroller him, and so it would wear me out with the chronic fatigue doing all this strolling. Then Michael would come home on the weekends, and it was a good thing because we couldn't shovel snow. It was too hard for us physically. Michael would try to stock us up with firewood. And I'm telling you all this because why this was so hard, just having a new baby, we had all this extra stuff that we were dealing with besides.
We heated with a wood fireplace.
Yeah, and so it just, we were on our last leg. We were getting worn out. It was kind of rough. And so then it was in June, we found out a couple months earlier, I guess it was April, I forget now when, a little bit, just not too long after her surgery, that my son was expecting with their second baby, and that's why my daughter-in-law was getting so sick on the trip home. She found out she was expecting with my third grandbaby. And in June, it was due in August, and in June my son called, and he said, Shayla's gone into labor 2.5 months early. And it was pretty.
She was 29 weeks. So, and back then, 20 years ago,
you didn't have the medical stuff.
It wasn't as advanced as it is now. I mean, it was still more advanced than it has been in the past,
and years ago, but it still wasn't that. And so the percentage,
was not a good thing.
the percentage was not good of survival was not good. And I remember when he called, I ran so fast across the street to Tawra and Mike's house, ran in their front door and yelled, "Get over here right now, we're praying for Shayla." And I know they were shocked because, I mean, we believe in God and we talk about God and praying all the time, but I never ran in the house screaming, "Get over here and pray right now." And they came both with their eyes like, "What's going on?" And they came over to me.
We didn't know.
Yeah, they didn't know. And I grabbed their hands and I said, "Shayla's having the baby now, and we're praying right now because we're going to get that baby saved." It was just like, and I remember they were just like, "Okay." And so we prayed like crazy. And it really worked out good in the sense that I happened to have their son there with me at the time. He was only about 4.
He was visiting for the summer.
And he was visiting, and he was going to stay for the summer, which helped them because they didn't have anybody really to watch him at this time. So at least they didn't have to worry about, a babysitter for him, and I had him with me. So she delivered the baby, and she was holding her own. And after about 2 weeks then, of course, I was so anxious to go back there to see them and see the baby and everything. So Cody and I ended up making a trip on back there. And I'll never forget that trip. Oh, when I say those trips were hair-raising, it was June, the middle of June, and I went through one mountain pass that had snow, a snowbank on each side. They only had like a really narrow lane for the cars, barely to go past each other. Pure ice on the road. So I'm gripping that wheel, trying to make it through this icy snow.
Well, because that's the year we had snow on the 4th of July, and you went back right after that.
Oh, yeah. And so I had Cody in the front seat with me. We'd put him in the car seat with the front seat because I was on a 3-day trip by myself, and there's no way I could keep reaching back to feed him, give him water, pick up his toys or anything while I was trying to drive. So we kind of had him there so I could take care of him, help him a little bit. But I was going through that snow and ice, and I looked over, and he's smiling at me, and there's blood pouring out of his mouth. I thought, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know if blood was coming out internally, where this blood was coming from. There's no shoulder. There's no place to pull over. And my 4-year-old grandson's bleeding out of the mouth. And it was so hair-raising. I don't forget how long. It was a good 20 minutes at least. I was grabbing for a towel and stuffing. Poor kid, I'd stuffed it on his mouth to try to stop some of the blood coming. Oh, it was awful, but what he'd done was, he had a little tiny pair, he was old enough to use them, of those blunted end scissors, and he just wanted to see if that would cut his tongue, and it did cut his tongue royal. He didn't have to have stitches or anything, but oh my goodness. But anyway, I finally made it there. And we had to, and for those of you that have never had anything like this with a premature baby, we went in there, and she was so cute. You never got to see her, but she was just, my son, she could lay on my son's hand is what the length of her was. If we could touch her, she could have laid right on his hand. She looked like a Barbie doll. Just like this little mini Barbie doll. But she was really cute. She had all of her features, it was just adorable. But they told us when we went there, and I think this is the right percentage if I remember right, they advised us that if you can have somebody stay with her at the hospital as much as possible, the chances go up like 80% or something of survival and nothing going wrong. Mm-hmm. If you can keep somebody, I was just floored by that. Who would think that just sitting with the baby like that would cause their chances to go up, survival chances? Mm-hmm. And I don't think people realize how important holding a baby, rocking a baby, talking, singing to a baby, and little children, how important that really is. I don't think we do. It's not just their emotional survival. In this case, it was their physical survival, and all that's intertwined. So we couldn't hold her at that point because her nerves weren't developed. So we had to sit with our hand through the hole in the incubator and just kind of cup our hands over her little buns and she could feel the heat from our hands. And then we'd sit and sing to her and talk to her. So we did it in shifts. I would get up early in the morning. Sometimes my son would do this once in a while before he left for work, but I'd get up about 5:30, go up to the hospital. That's another. You got to recognize the blessings God puts in your path. The hospital was like 3 minutes or less from the house. It made it so handy, so convenient for us to do this. If we'd had to drive, it would have been horrible having to drive. So that worked out so wonderful. But I would get up and then stay with her from about 5:30 until about 9 o'clock. And at that time, my grandson was awake at home, so I would drive back home. I would take over taking care of him, and then my daughter-in-law would leave and go up to the hospital. And she'd stay up there until about noon or 1 when my grandson went down for his nap. Then I would go back again and sit with her. And then my son would come home and we'd have dinner, and he would come up and stay at the hospital for a while. And then I would usually go up after my grandson went to bed again, about 8:30 or 9, and sit for a couple of hours. And so we just had this pattern routine that we were able to just keep it going. And do you know, she never had one single problem. She had to have no surgeries. She had nothing go wrong with her. Her lungs were perfect. Her heart was perfect. And I remember I was so excited because I had been there for, I don't know how long, 2 or 3 weeks at this point. And they had to keep her in the hospital from June until the middle of August. They do that just till they get their birth weight that they're supposed to have and stuff. And Tawra calls me after I'd been there about 3 weeks, and she said, Mom, I just went to the doctor today. She'd found out, the day we found out about Alex being born early, she'd also found out she was expecting with grandbaby number 4, Ellie. But she called in and said, Mom, I went to the doctor, and they said I have to be on bed rest. And you see, Michael was working up in Washington, so he wasn't home during the week even. She said, how fast can you get home? It was like, oh my, I thought here I was exhausted from doing the hospital thing back and forth. That's why I say after BJ was born, it just kind of went downhill after this with babies. I was so excited with these babies coming, but they were making me work on these babies. So it takes me 3 days to drive back to Idaho. So Michael was there home at that point, so I needed to leave I think it was the next day or something I was going to take off. And the nurses were so sweet because I wanted to hold her so bad, and we hadn't been allowed to hold her. And they said as soon as they take her off a feeding tube or something, then we could hold her. And it was like the nurses were cheering, and I walked in for the last time that I was going to be able to sit up there with her on my my sitting up to their time, whatever you call it. And they said, you get to hold her tonight. And it was like they handed me bags of gold. I was so excited. I got to hold her one time before I had to go back to Idaho. So I was frantically driving back to Idaho to start babysitting Tawra at this point. And
thanks.
And this is when I say things really geared up. They really geared up. So I think we'll pause right here, and then I'll tell you what happens in the next episode with Ellie and all of this type of things and books and all different things like that. So we will quit for this one, okay?
So, like, subscribe, and share, and visit us at livingonadime.com.
Bye-bye.